Monsieur le Directeur, Mesdames et Messieurs, ça tout fait ma troisième visite en Bretagne, mais ma première fois au festival. J'ai découvert des choses très intéressantes, notamment le whisky breton. Énormes quantités de whisky breton. C'est pourquoi je vais continuer en anglais, même parfois en écossais. I am delighted to accept this invitation and to launch the French edition of my book about the referendum in this wonderful festival. Initially, when I had the invitation, I thought of only flying in and out. And then I realised that flying in and out was going to take the whole day. We need more direct flights. We need a direct flight between Scotland and Brittany, without any question whatsoever. I charge my successor as First Minister of Scotland to ensure this must happen. But I'm really glad, in a way, that it's taken such time to get here and to go back, because that justified the 4 days I'm spending at this festival, which has been magnificent. This is an extraordinary thing you have here, a wonderful thing. When I leave the festival, I'm going back to Edinburgh to launch a show at the Edinburgh Festival, and I've been busy recruiting some of the artists here to appear in my show. But this is a wonderful, extraordinary festival. More strength to your elbow, and I'm sure it will continue from success to success. I've said I'll speak a bit about Europe and independence, autonomous movements, and what needs to be done to resurrect the European ideal and to resist the negative forces to the east and to the west, that is Brexit, and to the west, and some of the direction of politics in some of the countries to the east, notably in Poland, but others as well. Many people in Europe, many politicians, many establishment politicians, are congratulating themselves at the present moment. The danger of right-wing populism has been fended off for the time being, at least in the heart of the European project in France and the Netherlands. However, these challenges that I identified still remain to the west and to the east. Brexit, the process of Britain disengaging from the European continent, is moving to what is likely to be a calamitous conclusion. Whereas the European Union's bad boys of Hungary and Poland are straining the limits of Brussels' tolerance. And Michel Barnier's assured handling of Brexit thus far, it gives the illusion that things can perhaps be dealt with without rocking the essential foundations of Europe. Although the inability to rein in what is, by any standards, an autocratic Polish government has given rise to suggestions it would be better if that particular bad apple was to leave Europe rather than contaminate the rest of the barrel. Meanwhile, the European Commission is relatively deaf to demands for democratic expression within the borders of Europe. Apparently, as long as a state is loyal to the European Union as a member, then democratic entitlements within that state take second place to bureaucratic convenience, as Catalonia is finding out at the present moment. It is the case that when the SNP began to be very successful, all of a sudden I found it very difficult to meet President Barroso. It was quite easy to meet him when the SNP was unsuccessful. But when we started to become successful, then it became extraordinarily difficult to meet President Barroso. Luckily, I think Jean-Claude Juncker is a different calibre of politician entirely. But nonetheless, if a state, as we see currently in Spain, is loyal to the European project, then the normal understanding of democratic convention of the rights of people takes second place to that convenience. Interestingly enough, since Brexit, since the British government, since the British establishment were become disloyal to the European project, then all of a sudden the doors of the Commission President are open once again to Scotland, and a new atmosphere prevails between the European Commission and Scottish ambitions. What I'm saying about these range of challenges to the status quo do illustrate something really important, that the European ideal has to a great degree lost the high ground of the 1990s, where workers across the continent looked to Brussels for social progress. Submerged nationalities in the continent looked to the Commission for support against the centralism of their own state government. And European and Eastern Europe, rather, newly free of the communist yoke, saw their salvation and security in the Western liberalism of the European Union. I'm going to suggest today that Scotland's current position should supply some inspiration for elsewhere in Europe, as well as illustrating some of the challenges. And the reason for that lies deep in Scottish history. I was given a book, bought actually by my kind translator, a book earlier this week of Breton history, which I'm busy reading. I'm now a student of Breton history. But a look at Scottish history would helps enormously in understanding things in Europe at the present moment. In my estimation, there have been two fundamental shocks, two big surprises, two amazing occurrences in the last 1,000 years in the continent of Europe. Number one was Leicester City winning the English Premiership 2 seasons ago. That was a big surprise. It was 1,000 to 1 against it happening, but it happened. The second biggest shock was the Battle of Stirling Bridge in 1297, when a Scottish peasant army overturned the might of Plantagenet, heavy cavalry. Incidentally, Breton, of course, was allied to the Plantagenets at that time, but we'll skip over that inconvenient moment of misjudgment on your part. But the Battle of Stirling Bridge was a shock. It was a huge surprise. It wasn't meant to happen. And what's interesting about it is the fact it happened, obviously the consequences that followed, but what is really, really interesting for the purposes of this lecture is what happened immediately after the battle. Now you might think this was Scotland, okay, medieval Scotland, they just won a great victory. You might think in the finest traditions of this great festival they would have had a ceilidh, a party, a major celebration, and I suspect they probably did. But in between the celebrations, they also wrote, that is, the twin guardians of Scotland, Sir William Wallace, or Mel Gibson to this audience, and his co-guardian Andrew de Murray wrote a letter, in Latin obviously, to the Hanseatic League in Lubeck. Now the Hanseatic League were the free-thinking, free-trading, small countries and cities of Europe allied against the Plantagenets, of which Britain was allied. And the Hanseatic League, if you like, was a forerunner of the single market. It was a medieval version of the common market. Freely translated from the Latin, that message, written immediately after the Battle of Stirling Bridge, read as follows. It said, look, there has been a shock, there has been a change, we're now back in charge, the English are out, can we have our trading concessions back, please? So immediately after this enormous victory, the assumption of a hope of Scottish nationhood being preserved in the Middle Ages, the first thing that was done, the very first thing it done, was to secure the trading concessions, to secure the trading arrangement, was to secure the economic progress that the Hanseatic League had allowed over much of Europe. Now, rather like Leicester City, William Wallace came down with a bump in the next season at the Battle of Falkirk. But nonetheless, that victory, and more importantly, how that victory was seen, in other words, Scottish nationality was seen within a European context, is highly significant for us today. You see, that letter, that Lubeck letter, would be the equivalent of the Scottish First Minister today writing to the European Commission, look, we don't like this idea of full English Brexit, we didn't vote for it, we're not having it, we hope to be in charge very soon. If you wind the European clock forward from the Battle of Stirling Bridge around 450 years, we find a very erudite, educated Scottish gentleman, absolutely bored out of his mind in Toulouse, writing a letter to a friend back in Scotland. This educated professor was accompanying a wastrel of a Scottish aristocrat on the Grand Tour. And while the Scottish aristocrat spent his time, well, actually, a wastrel is a bit hard. I mean, he was spending his time not unlike many people in this festival spend their time. So he was enjoying himself. The academic Scot was cooling his heels and getting increasingly frustrated that he couldn't debate and converse with great intellects of France of that day. So he wrote a letter, an angry letter, or an irritated letter back to a friend in Scotland. And he said, look, I'm so bored, I'm thinking of writing a new book. Well, the bored Scot was Adam Smith, the friend was David Hume, and the book was The Wealth of Nations, the foundation text of economics. And the point about that story is that in the 18th century, Scotland was still at the centre of the development of European thought, and the age of rationality, which was represented by the Scottish Enlightenment, and therefore ushered in, to an arguable extent, both the French and the American revolutions. If we're going to clock forward another century and a half, to get to 100 years ago, then we see a different engagement in the continent of Europe. I was listening yesterday at the magnificent parade which started off this festival, and the Isle of Cumbrae pipe band came in and played songs in the pipes from the First World War, a really poignant sense and tribute to what we should all remember. The point about it being particularly of a particular sentiment and importance is that the Isle of Cumbrae, of course, is a Scottish island. And if you look at the Scottish Islands or the Highlands of Scotland, or indeed the northeast of Scotland, where I'm from, then what happened in the First World War, if you look at so many of the villages of Brittany and rural France in particular, what happened 100 years ago was not a decimation, meaning 1/10 of people were killed. For rural France, for Scotland, for Russia and its rural area, you were talking about 50% of young men of fighting age were killed or extremely seriously injured in the trenches 100 years ago. So whether we're talking about Scotland fighting for its independence in the Middle Ages, Scotland contributing to the age of rationality through the Scottish Enlightenment of the 18th century, or Scotland participation in the Holocaust of the Great War of 100 years ago, there's no doubt that each of these three illustrations tells us that Scotland for a millennium has been a European country in trade, in cultural and scientific advance, in peace and in war. Scotland has been at the heart of Europe. Therefore, to be told now, given that history, that against the wishes and declared intent of the Scottish people in the European referendum, that these connections have to be loosened or perhaps even severed entirely, that we are to be reduced to the role of at best a bystander, is not just democratically unacceptable, it flies in the face of Scottish history. It shouldn't be just unacceptable to Scotland, it should be unacceptable to all of Europe. There are many negatives about the Brexit process. It will be intensely damaging to the United Kingdom. Brexit offers nothing but salt and vinegar, as President Tusk memorably put it. Even among the Brexiteers, the previous bright boasts of a global Britain are now being replaced by concern as to how to limit the damage. However, one of the worst aspects of Brexit is the degree of time and effort that Europe as a whole is now devoting to the removal of one major state from the European Union. What a waste that is, when Europe's challenges should be on the present and the future, that we should be galvanising to repair the evident weaknesses in the European project, a project which Robert Schuman pointed out these 66 years ago will not be made all at once or in a single plan. However, there's an aspect to recent developments in Scotland which should bring hope to the rest of the continent. We hear a great deal in political discourse about how the established order is under siege from the forces of right-wing populism, how liberal values, progressive politics, respect for the judiciary are on the retreat across Europe and indeed across the planet. However, in Scotland, it is still the progressive pro-European forces who are in the ascendancy. Even after the recent United Kingdom election, the SNP, with its unswerving wish to engage with the rest of the continent, holds a majority of both Westminster and Scottish Parliament seats, more than the Unionist parties in Scotland combined. The protest against established order in Scotland is expressed in liberal values, and Europe, for all its faults, is regarded as a positive thing to be close, not a negative to be distanced from. As Jean-Claude Juncker said himself, Scotland has earned the right to be heard and to be listened to in Brussels. Now, Scotland is not unique in this. In a number of countries, forces of change have also emerged from the autonomous left. And yet, how have the European Union institutions responded? The answer is not well. It's almost as if the reactionary vandals are at the gates of the Treaty of Rome. And in that moment of crisis, you would expect that help and assistance from all progressive Europeans should be treasured and valued. It hasn't seemed like that consistently over these last few years. We need, ladies and gentlemen, a Europe which is channeled into fresh hope. We need to lift again the tattered flag of a social Europe. We need to fuel once again the idealistic vision that was propelled the Celtic League, where self-determination of peoples, linguistic, cultural diversity, peace and democracy could all find a home within a united Europe. It was Gandhi who once said that a state should be judged by how it treats its minorities within a state. Similarly, in my contention, Europe should be judged by how it encourages the cultural expression of its submerged nationalities, how it invigorates a people's Europe, and how it stands against sometimes the centralist powers of existing states in allowing proper democratic and cultural expression. Last year, the Government of Scotland published a paper on Scotland's way forward. It was a pragmatic view on how we could maintain our European connections, how the UK could accommodate this without countermanding the Brexit process voted for by England. It spelled out clearly what is totally absent from the rest of the UK body politic. That is a clear vision of how Scotland's European views could be accommodated within political reality. That paper postulated Scottish membership of the European Economic Area through EFTA as the most practical and immediate means of retaining Scotland's traditional and historic European horizon. It would be fair to say that that paper and the ideals within it didn't get much of a hearing during the hurly-burly of a UK general election. And that's one reason why the SNP fell back while still retaining a majority of Scottish seats. And it's also true that post-election, the United Kingdom government arrogantly believe they can afford to allow no concessions whatsoever to Scotland. With the enfeebled United Kingdom, I almost said temporary and enfeebled United Kingdom Prime Minister, now even refusing to meet Scotland's democratically elected First Minister. It is remarkable when a politician who fails to obtain a majority regards herself as so important that she can refuse to meet a politician who has gained a majority in a proportional system. However, wise words stand the test of time. And the wise words in that Scottish Government European document will indeed stand the test of time. And with each passing month, over the next 2 to 3 years, the case for Scotland asserting its distinctive European nationhood will go stronger, as the case for an isolationist Britain is exposed and weak and shallow, as opposed to strong and stable. As an article in the Financial Times put it recently, Britain currently faces one of 3 outcomes from Brexit: abject humiliation, great humiliation, or just humiliation. Or to paraphrase what they used to say in Ireland, England's difficulty could be Scotland's opportunity. But what we need now from the rest of this continent is not just goodwill and encouragement. We need vocal support and the realisation that we have to turn the tide away from all that Brexit represents. We have to do that if we are to build a European home with room for all its nationalities. Or as the Scots poet Hamish Henderson once put it in his great anthem, Freedom Camoy. Hamish Henderson, who had such a great regard for the literature, the song and tradition of Britain. But he put it in his great anthem: "So come all ye at hame with freedom, ne'er heed what the hoodies croak for do. In your house saw the bairns of Adam, can find brig, barley brie, and painted room." Through Gary.